Good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. Aaron Mulvany. I'm an associate professor in the Social Development and Policy program at Habib University. I would like to welcome you all to the first Twitter space of the academic year on the topic of the dilemma of climate change in Pakistan. I do want to apologize for the late start. There have been some technical issues with some of our guests this evening, but we thought it best to get things started with the speakers who are sorted out on their end. So uh, this semester, Habib University is going to be tackling the topic of climate change and climate change in Pakistan. I think all of us who are listening have been following for the past weeks and months even, the events around weather over the summer, the torrential rainfall in Sindh and Balochistan, the hurricane in the West Indies that pummeled Puerto Rico, and the typhoon, the super typhoon, in fact, that just hit Miyazaki Prefecture in Japan over the last couple of days. It's really, really difficult these days to get away from climate and to get away from the disasters that are the consequence. But the conversation in Pakistan has only recently turned to the question of climate change and its effects on people, on the nation, on the economy. So Habib University hopes in the coming weeks to invite a number of panelists across a number of panels to these issues. This evening is going to act as a prologue, and we are going to talk about climate change writ large across Pakistan, across South Asia, and we will talk about some of the issues related to mitigation and recovery, mitigation and recovery, accountability, global north versus global south. I will say to begin, all of the opinions here are of the speakers. Habib University is not accountable for the opinions spoken here, only we speakers are. But with that, I would like to say that we are joined today, right now, by Dr. Maira Hayat, who is a sociocultural anthropologist. She's assistant professor of environment and peace studies at the University of Notre Dame, and she works at the intersection of water and climate and social justice. We are also joined by Imtiaz Ali, who is a scholar, researcher, and lecturer of environment and international relations at University of Karachi, Pakistan. He's been affiliated with the Sustainable Development Policy Institute here in Pakistan, SDPI, and works closely with organizations like the Citizens Foundation. We also have Haniya Mansoor, who's the founder of Project Kamyabi, which is a social enterprise that upcycles pre-consumer textile waste, diverting it from landfills and working to empower marginalized women artisans in Pakistan. Her work addresses the impact of the global apparel and textile industry on the climate crisis. We will, with luck, be able to sort out Afia Salam, who will hopefully join us, and Shahrukh Wani is an economist who is supposed to join us, but my understanding is that his flight has been rescheduled, and so he may not be able to join us after all. With luck, he will join us in a bit, but otherwise we will have to count on his insights on another panel. So with that introduction, I would like to invite our speakers who are currently available to first open up with their thoughts on the climate crisis, either as it affects Pakistan in particular, or the global south, or the world. And if she can, I would like to hear what you, Maira, have to say.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. And I'm really looking forward to a conversation, and I very much hope that this will be, a conversation more than just me saying the 2 or 3 points that I thought it might be important to flesh out. Ashan, before I proceed, so I did ask Sadaf about what language we want, and Sadaf had said Urdu is preferred. So I can only offer Urdu or English. So should I then go ahead in Urdu? What is advisable? What is preferred?
I think bilingual works. My Urdu is so-so. Bilingual works.
Okay. I will, I will try. Okay, so very quickly, I thought कि हम शुरू करें with the 3 distinctions that might be helpful to keep in mind as we talk more generally about climate change. So एक मेरे नज़दीक अहम है long term effects और short term or immediate effects or impacts of climate change में distinguish करना. And I think associated with this distinction is the question of stability and variability. Then the second distinction I think it would be important to underscore is the rural-urban distinction. And then the third one is internal politics of accountability around climate change, nationally within Pakistan, and also internationally. So, depending on how much time I have, and please ask me to stop जब मेरे 5 minute खत्म हो जाते हैं. But let me start with the first one, which is long-term effects or short-term जो distinction है, right? And I mean, this might be very obvious to most of you, but I think it's worth being on this perhaps a little further कि climate change से associated जो कुछ processes और phenomena हैं वो slow हैं, or they just take more time to develop, to advance, to become perceptible, right? So for example, आप अगर consider करें sea level rise को, right? जो समुद्री सतह ऊपर जा रही है, और फिर इससे associated issues हैं salt water intrusion के. अब इसको perceive करना, देखना, समझना, identify करना is much harder than, for example, a flash flood, right? Which is a very contained, neatly contained event, disaster, right? So it's a question of timelines, and it's also a question of then perceptibility. What is easier to see and what is harder to appreciate? अब जिस तरह आप देखें dipping water table की जो आजकल बात हो रही है, right? Like this, the larger question of groundwater storage, हमारे aquifers, हमारे aquifer में क्या हो रहा है? अब unless you are digging a bore and regularly monitoring कि आपका कितना नीचे आप किस depth से पानी निकाल रहे हैं, और वो किस तरह वो depth change करे, मतलब you're not going to like monitor depths every week after week, and you're not also going to register or be able to register these changes, right? So these are some changes that will only become noticeable when a lot of time has passed. And this is potentially very dangerous because it means that while there is time to act or better, we don't recognize the problem here, right? And we sort of continue doing what we're doing. अब जिस तरह ये जो ग्राउंड वाटर स्टोरेज आ रहा है, और इसमें जो वो एक वेरिएबिलिटी का भी जो एसोसिएटेड एलिमेंट है कि इस तरह नहीं है, फॉर एग्जांपल कि ओ हाँ पहले बारिशें बहुत ज़्यादा हो जाएंगी और फिर बारिशें होना बंद हो जाएंगी, राइट? So study after study and report after report shows you that the one constant is going to be increasing variability, right? Which means कभी बारिश ज़्यादा होगी फिर कम हो जाएगी, right? So and that unfortunately then becomes a reason or an excuse for people to say, oh हाँ नहीं पानी का कोई scarcity का मसला नहीं है या abundance का मसला नहीं है, it's one or the other, whereas actually it's going to be increasing variability. Again, returning to your water table wala question, higher temperatures just more generally mean more evaporation from the land, right? Like the land surface. So there's less recharge. Snow melt reduction, similar effect on groundwater. But of course, is not it, right? Like you could say, acha, these are by and large, or overall, we could say these are more natural physical processes. But of course, you can't understand these without also looking at the effect of human pumping, right? So it's a combination, and it's difficult. So I want to accept and recognize that it's difficult to keep distinguishing between these various factors. But it's also useful, I think, for us to ask why we want to keep distinguishing, and like why this question keeps arising. ये climate change है या नहीं है, ये है या नहीं है, या ये component है या नहीं है, right? There are strategic reasons for doing this, and we can get into that when we talk about international diplomacy and politics and the question of reparations, climate reparations, right? But other than that, like at a perceptual level, कि हम climate change को समझते कैसे हैं, हम उसकी reality को कैसे समझते हैं, हमारी understanding क्या है climate change की. I feel like this question can often become a hindrance to a deeper understanding of climate change as it affects people. और इससे अगर आप जो variability वाला issue है, like if you look at different studies, for example, different studies are running different models and they are reaching different conclusions, right? This is not a problem, but science has never and is not going to ever be able to give us 100% certainty on certain issues, right? That's just not the scientific endeavor. So एक study ये 2000 में publish हुई है Nature में, right? And I'm happy to share links in the later once I've spoken, so that people can read these documents at length. अब जिस तरह इन्होंने लिखा है इस study में, our results reveal increasing groundwater resources under 21st century warming when only the climate-driven factors are considered. And these for this paper are rainfall, snowmelt, and evapotranspiration. Then they say the rainfall increase is a dominant factor, suggesting that without considering pumping effects, the changing climate could provide larger groundwater sustainability in Northwest India, currently experiencing rapid groundwater storage depletion for supporting irrigated agriculture. So you see how complex it becomes because we're considering interactions of so many different things, and also that it stops being meaningful to say इसको isolate करें. अच्छा अगर हम सिर्फ evapotranspiration का effect understand करें तो actually हमारी aquifer depletion नहीं हो रही. मगर जब हम human pumping का effect इस model में, तो then our aquifer is likely to respond, in a different way.
Very good. Very good, Maira.
Okay, I should stop.
Well, for now, we'll come back to this. We do have plenty of time left this evening. I'm sure that we will get back to this in one way or another. I see that Afia Salam has joined us, so I would like to give her the second chance to speak. If you can unmute yourself, Afia, we'd like to hear what you have to say to begin.
Okay, so I'll take off from where Maira has said that she's unpacked a lot of things. There was a question of aquifer recharge when I joined, and the topic that you've chosen for this space actually says it all. The dilemma, because the unpredictability is the dilemma. Climate change is not a set behavior that it's happening. I mean, different things are happening. The predictability is not there, and that is why when we say we need to sort of, make our people, the vulnerable people, cope better with it. So one has to first find out what kind of multiple vulnerabilities they are exposed to. So the farmers are exposed to some vulnerabilities. Now we've seen the livestock farmers have been exposed to another vulnerability because they thought that the area they were living in was safe. Now that safe area is no longer safe, as we know from this year's rain. We always knew about the vulnerability of the people in Gilgit-Baltistan and their vulnerability to the Gulf. We do have a 1,000-kilometer long coast, and there are different kind of vulnerabilities right now. I mean, there are models which show that the sea level rise will intrude way inside, and one of the largest and most populous city in the country is sited right at the coast where I live, Karachi. And the delta, of course, presents a kind of actually a very scary model of what sea level rise can mean, because when the water is not being released to go down to the delta, the sea intrusion is taking place. So the actual sea level rise is going to have a similar effect where large tracts of our coastal land will become barren, and so will the subsoil water will turn brackish. So all these things, these are those signs. I'm not even just yet talking about the heat waves, recurrent heat wave, well as the heat island effect that a city like Karachi experienced in 2015. So when we say that Pakistan is in the top 10 bracket of the vulnerability index and has been there for over a decade and a half, one must also remember that it is a multi-threat country. There are other countries which usually, I mean, they are single-threat countries. You've got the small island nations, so the biggest threat they face is from sea level rise. Bangladesh also, to an extent, actually, because it doesn't really go very deep. It's not a very extended country like Pakistan. So that too is exposed to a single threat. But Pakistan has these multi-threats, where the heat is contributing to the desertification.
I fear we may have just lost you, Afia. I see you still connected, but we've lost your voice. We will use that as a break. Afia, when you are able to reestablish your voice, just let us know and we'll bring you back in, or maybe with a second round of questions. I would like to invite Haniya Mansoor to offer her preliminary thoughts before we have some questions. Haniya, can you unmute?
मेरा नाम हानिया मंसूर है और मैं फ़ैशन रेवोल्यूशन पाकिस्तान की कंट्री कोऑर्डिनेटर हूँ। मैं एक छोटी सी सोशल एंटरप्राइज़ भी रन करती हूँ जहाँ पे हम प्री कंज्यूमर टेक्सटाइल वेस्ट को अपसाइकिल करते हैं एंड इट्स ऑल फेयर ट्रेड। सो बेसिकली आज जो है मैं थोड़ा सा बात करना चाहूँगी ऑन फैशंस एंड टेक्सटाइल इंडस्ट्रीज इम्पैक्ट ऑन द क्लाइमेट क्राइसिस। पाकिस्तान एक ऐसी पोजीशन में है जहाँ पे हमारे ऊपर आई थिंक दिस अ डबल वैमी इन टर्म्स ऑफ, आई थिंक ऑल्सो मायरा टॉक्ड अबाउट दिस रूरल अर्बन डिस्टिंक्शन, और ये फैशन के अंदर भी बहुत एविडेंट है बिकॉज जब हम अपने कॉटन फार्मर्स को देखते हैं और हम देखते हैं कि उनके ऊपर क्या इम्पैक्ट हो रहा है विद फ्लडिंग, विद क्लाइमेट क्राइसिस, and then we look at what's happening in the urban centers in terms of what's happening with garment workers and their exploitation. So fashion has a really huge impact on Pakistan, on our workers. एक तो उनकी labor practices बहुत ज़्यादा exploitative हैं, and then secondly the impact that cotton production has, the waste that is created from dyes that are choking our rivers and our oceans. So there's a huge impact of the fashion industry, and unfortunately Pakistan is at the receiving end because हमारे यहाँ कोई ऐसी legislation नहीं है जो हमारे workers को protect कर सके या हमारी environment को protect कर सके. So we're basically in the same boat as a lot of other countries in the global south, जहाँ हम contribute बहुत कम करते हैं global emissions को, लेकिन जो हमारे ऊपर impact होता है वो बहुत ज़्यादा detrimental है. I know there's a lot of talk going on around having the global north compensate us for what we're going through right now. But I think it's also important to look within, and I think maybe Maira or Afia ji talked about that. I think Maira did, कि हम खुद क्या कर रहे हैं within our country in terms of legislation. So I think that's really important. And as Maira said, I think it'd be important to also have a conversation around this and have other people contribute too. Because Bangladesh, for instance, there's something called the Accord that's happening, and it focuses the textile industry. And I think it's really important for us to have something similar in Pakistan too, जहाँ पे हम खाली obviously workers' right के ऊपर भी focus करें, but also the impact that big fashion brands have on the environment. Fashion contributes about 8 to 10% of carbon emissions to the world. That's really big, and about 20% of wastewater also comes from fashion. Another really big problem with the fashion industry, और आप ये सब I'm sure note करते होंगे कभी अगर आपने अपने कपड़ों के अंदर देखा होगा वो कि क्या किस चीज़ के बने हुए, तो पॉलिएस्टर हर चीज़ के अंदर अब मौजूद है. I'm not saying कि कॉटन जो है वो ज़्यादा I mean maybe थोड़ा less, it's very water intensive to produce, लेकिन पॉलिएस्टर की प्रॉब्लम ये कि पॉलिएस्टर takes hundreds of years to decompose. तो सबसे पहले तो I think something that we need to focus on is obviously getting conversation started about creating textiles or going back to textiles that were maybe a part of our heritage that were not as detrimental to the environment. Polymers, I think, are 65% of the clothes that we wear are made from polyester, and so there's a huge impact in terms of, and it's inexpensive, right? Or it's inexpensive to the businesses that produce it, but it's obviously very expensive and comes at a huge cost to the environment. And because of every time that you wash it, there's microfibers that are coming out, and I think there's about 70 million barrels a year is actually used of oil. 70 million barrels of oil are used a year to make polyester. So there's a huge impact on the environment in terms of that as well. And every time that we wash it, we constantly hear that microplastics are being found. So that's another thing, right? So we might think these are just clothes, right? But clothes, fashion, textile, all of these things have a huge impact. And then I'm not sure how many. I think Pakistan is kind of good at this because हमारे यहाँ कपड़े जो हैं वो बहुत हम हर different तरीके से इस्तेमाल करते हैं जब वो उनकी shelf life खत्म हो जाती है. But unfortunately, even if we are doing good in terms of that, countries that are not, especially the global north, what happens is there's a lot of overproduction going on right now. आप लोगों ने जरूर नाम सुना होगा H&M, Zara, ये सारे के सारे brands जो हैं ये इतने ज़्यादा ओवर प्रोड्यूस कर रहे हैं कपड़ों को, और वो सब लो क्वालिटी कपड़े हैं. तो उसका क्या मतलब है कि लो क्वालिटी कपड़े उसके बाद आप उनको थोड़ा से पहनेंगे और आप उनको फेंक देंगे, राइट? वो पॉलिएस्टर के बने हुए, तो वो पॉलिएस्टर कॉन्स्टेंटली एनवायरनमेंट के अंदर इट्स लाइक कमिंग आउट, एंड देन व्हेन देयर इज ओवर प्रोडक्शन एंड दे आर अनेबल टू सेल ऑल ऑफ दीज क्लोथ्स, व्हाट हैपेंस इज दे एंड अप इन लैंडफिल्स and they get burnt. So वो एक और उस तरह जो है वो carbon emissions हो रहे हैं. So it's like just multiple ways that we're being bombarded by the fashion industry and being hit by it globally. And then obviously that kind of not just trickles down, but it like literally just floods us, our country with all kinds of climate issues. So those are some of the things I'd like to talk about and maybe discuss as we go forward in today's discussion.
Perfect, Haniya. Thank you very much. I'm happy to see that Afia has rejoined us. We hope that her technical issues are cleared up. But in the meantime, we have lost Imtiaz Ali, who is having difficulties joining as well. I hope those of you who are joining us from Pakistan, I think you probably all recognize that there have been some technical issues with the internet over the past couple of days, and I think they're affecting all of us. So Imtiaz hopefully will be joining us a few moments. Let's ask a broad question for the panelists who we do have here. I think foremost on all of our minds has been the current flooding across Pakistan. By some accounts, 1/3 of the country is underwater. and estimates are approaching $30 billion in losses. But Pakistan, as part of South Asia, has always been part of the monsoon belt. And so in a location where annual flooding is common, and in fact most of the groundwater is recharged by a few weeks or months of heavy rains, why does the government always seem to be caught so flat-footed? It must be said that this year's rains were far, far in excess of what they've ever been expected. Some estimates, Sindh received more than 700% of its average rainfall just in the past month. So these kinds of things can barely be predicted. However, across South Asia, in Pakistan, India, in Bangladesh, when flooding does happen, government response often leaves a lot to be desired. And when rains can be predicted and flooding seems like it's inevitable, why do you think this happens so consistently?
So in the interest of time, if you
Yes,
want,
please, Maira, thank you.
until it's sorted out for Afia, maybe I can speak, but please, as soon as it's sorted out, ask me to stop.
Please.
So I just, by way again of a concrete example, I think at play there are structural factors. There are structural, long-term, historical reasons of political economy, of global political economy. The way that the political, military elites and a whole culture around governance in the country has developed. And then also there are more immediate and micro or smaller scale factors that it might be helpful to make this distinction as we try to understand what could have been done better, what more could have been done. Preparedness nahi thi to कौन से elements हैं जो lacking थे. So एक एग्जांपल अगर आप देखें, इसके बारे में बहुत लोग लिख रहे हैं, काम भी हो चुका है, रिसर्च भी है कि अब जिस तरह तौनसा बराज की डिफिशिएंसीज की डिफेक्ट बात की जाती है, 2010 की फ्लडिंग के बाद भी की गई थी, अब दोबारा भी की जा रही है. उसके ऊपर हर तरह का लिटरेचर है. ठीक, एक तो बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट क्रिटिकल लिटरेचर है जो स्कॉलर्स ने लिखा है. अगेन आई विल बी, जो मुझे पता है, आई विल बी हैप्पी टू शेयर लिंक्स, और जो औरों ने पढ़ा है प्लीज ऑल्सो do it. And then also अगर आप वर्ल्ड बैंक की एक देखें रिपोर्ट, मैंने अभी परसों पढ़ी उनकी, आई थिंक 2000 क्या साल है, 2004 की शायद रिपोर्ट है, जब वो बहुत बड़ा महंगा तौनसा की रिहैब और मॉडर्नाइजेशन का प्रोजेक्ट था. तो उस पे उन्होंने खुद लिखा है, उसमें वो कहते हैं कि इसका जो स्ट्रक्चरल इशू या एक फिक्स है, उसको करने के लिए बहुत पैसे और वो फाइनेंशियल कंस्ट्रेंट की वजह से हम ये एक और छोटा फिक्स करते हैं, जिसके बारे में अगेन देयर इज स्कॉलरशिप टू शो एंड पीपल हैव रिटन अबाउट दिस एंड क्रिटिसाइज दिस आल्सो, कि जब आप स्ट्रक्चरल डिफेक्ट्स की बात कर रहे हैं और इनएडिक्वेसीज की बात कर रहे हैं, जब आपको पता है कि एग्रीवेटेड रिस्क है of breaching happening again, then why are we doing these stopgap measures? Because they're endangering people, right? But I think इसमें again like the larger question that's implicated here is ये जिस तरह वो कह रहे हैं कि पैसे नहीं है, financial constraints हैं. अब उसमें फिर उस तरह के बड़े सवाल उठते हैं कि पाकिस्तान जैसे मुल्क में उसकी इकोनॉमी में आप देखें कि अगर इतना सारा जो इन्वेस्टमेंट है और फोकस है वो डेट सर्विसिंग पे चला जाता है, तो what can we expect, not just Pakistan, countries of the global south also, what can we expect from them in terms of dedicated investment and planning for climate adaptation? This should not be taken as an excuse for governments to say, oh हाँ हमारे पास पैसे नहीं है, हम कुछ नहीं कर सकते थे. And I think at this level, अगर हम और बारीकियों में जाएं तो हम कुछ और चीजें ऐसी सामने आती हैं जिसके लिए, फॉर एग्जांपल, आपको पैसे as such नहीं चाहिए होते, right? So without losing sight of the importance of these global political economy inequalities and constraints, there are some small scale things that for example should have been done, and one really wonders, right, कि ये क्यों नहीं हुआ. अब and I think Afia can again speak to this much better and in more detail. कि एक बात बार बार आती है कि लोकल लेवल पे DDMAs फॉर एग्जांपल, इवन PDMAs को रिसोर्सेज नहीं दिए गए, जबकि 2010 के सैलाब के बाद NDMA की अपनी रिपोर्ट ने कहा था कि लोकल लेवल पे कैपेसिटी बिल्डिंग करना और रिसोर्सेज का इंतजाम करना बहुत इम्पोर्टेंट है, राइट? सो दीज ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस, दीज गवर्नमेंट बॉडीज आर रिकग्नाइजिंग दीज नीड्स देमसेल्व्स, एंड येट वी सी दैट not much, for example, was done. अब इस पे आप देखें NDMA की ही ये जो lessons learned वाली उनकी रिपोर्ट है, उसमें वो कहते हैं कि फ्लड सीजन में हमारे पास स्पेसिफिक किस्म की वेयर हाउसिंग होनी चाहिए रिलीफ गुड्स के हवाले से. Was anything of the sort in evidence this time? And the whole point of this is कि, for example, jab, so for example, when a disaster strikes, that you don't end up losing valuable time trying to things together, either from other countries saying, please help us, or even resources that you have yourself. And इस पे जैसा मैं एक engineer से बात कर रही थी, irrigation official से some weeks ago. And one of the things they gave was like, again, like notice कि कितने local level पे constraints और how they change. And they were like कि हमारा protocol ये होता है कि जब flood risk बढ़ जाता है to whatever level X, Y or whatever those levels are, तो हमें बड़ा material रखना होता है on site so that we are able to stem the flow of water. Now, even if we set aside the larger fundamental question of how this whole approach to flood fighting is problematic and increasingly inadequate, अगर हम उसको 2 मिनट के लिए pause भी कर लें और इसी paradigm में structural engineering के paradigm से ही देखें, तो ये XEMs कहते हैं, executive engineers कहते हैं कि हम अक्सर ये जो हमें requirement है कि हम material रखें, boulders, tree trunks वगैरह, हम वो बुलाते नहीं हैं, हम वो requisition नहीं कराते, क्योंकि अगर flood आ जाता है तो ठीक है, वो चीज़ें इस्तेमाल हो जाएंगी, ठीक है, और हमने प्रिपेयर किया होगा, डैमेज अवर्ट हो जाएगा या एटलीस्ट कम हो जाएगा. बट अगर हम ये सारी चीज़ें बुलाएं और कॉन्ट्रैक्टर से बात कर लेते हैं कि आप नज़दीक ले आए इस तरह की मशीनरी, एंड देन द वर्स्ट डजंट कम टू पास, तो फिर हमारे ऊपर इंक्वायरियाँ शुरू हो जाती हैं, हमें सस्पेंड कर दिया जाता है कि आपने इतना नुकसान करवा दिया, एक्सट्रा का है. So I think that, again, to add to a point that Afia was making, and also a point, the very important, crucial point that Hania was ending on, कि क्लाइमेट चेंज की वजह से जो अनसर्टेनिटी चैलेंजेस और इंट्रोड्यूस होंगे या एग्जैसरबेट होंगे, वो rather than seeing them as something new and out of the blue and completely unprecedented, I think it's more helpful for us to understand कि वो existing constraints, structures, dynamics और के through वाजे होंगे. So for example, this question of ये जो फैशन इंडस्ट्री की बता रही है बात हमें अभी, that Hania has explained so nicely to us, right? Like this is such an urgent issue, but you cannot understand this, like she's saying, separately from the question of a long history of labor exploitation in the country and of almost the complete absence of labor protections and laws, right? So climate change is not separate from these realities. It's only going to intensify and play out along these inequalities and fault lines, which is, I think, also something that both the earlier speakers were saying. When जब वो मतलब one way to talk about it is कि अच्छा rural urban fault line किस तरह, and then the other one also is कि how do categories like rural urban index a relationship. The rural urban are not just geographical locations, they are also a relationship, and increasingly we see that like where, for example, are wealthier people living, and why somehow do those areas just seem to have better infrastructure management and provision. So I guess I'm going to stop now because I really want to hear from the other speakers. So if the technical issues are sorted, maybe Afia can continue, or I don't know.
Yes,
I also
Maira.
want to hear from Imtiaz. Okay.
I think we have finally sorted out the technical issues. We have made Imtiaz Ali a co-host, and now I believe that he can join us. I know, Maira, that you mentioned you called on Afia on a couple of occasions in your response, and unfortunately she dropped out when she was giving her opening statement. But before I call on Afia, I think I would like to give Imtiaz, who was finally able to join us, a chance for either to respond to Maira or to give his first thoughts, and then we'll come to you, Afia.
Thank you so much, Aaron. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much for having me in this space. I'm sorry, there was a technical issue from my side. So let's start with the situation on ground. Recently, I visited my hometown, Dadu. So I am hailing from Dadu. So there are 4 tehsils of Dadu: Johi, Meher, Kensha, and Dadu city. So 3 tehsils are underwater. Johi, that has a population of 50,000 people. Kensha, 150,000 people. Meher, around 200,000 people. So they are in underwater. What is the humanitarian cost of these floods in this area, especially in Dadu? So most affected people are women and children. There is a food crisis. And casualty rate, unfortunately, is higher in Sindh when we draw a comparison between the other provinces of Pakistan because of substandard healthcare system. the situation is worsening with the passage of time, and now we are facing food insecurity, disease, and on the regular basis, the casualty rate is a mounting casualty rate. So today's numbers are 12. Deaths are reported in Sindh, especially in Dadu and Larkana region, and there is an average 12 to 15 deaths in Dadu and Larkana region. So now I would like to discuss some underlying causes of flooding in Sindh, especially in this region, Upper Sindh, Dadu and Larkana. Besides climate change and environmental impacts, so it is a fact that we are facing environmental changes and climate change and environmental impacts. But the reasons of flooding in Upper Sindh, especially in Dadu, Larkana, and Shikarpur districts, that is because of mismanagement. One thing that is obvious is mismanagement. And why did it happen? Because of centuries-old irrigation infrastructure. Unfortunately, the irrigation budget of Sindh, that is around 18 billion rupees, and agriculture budget is around 16 billion rupees, but we have no idea what are where they are spending their budgets. There is outdated irrigation infrastructure and system. So next thing is politics. Okay, so thank you so much for having me in this space. I'm sorry, there was a technical issue from my side. So let's start with the situation on ground. Recently, I visited my hometown, Dadu. So I am hailing from Dadu. So there are 4 tehsils of Dadu: Johi, Meher, Kensha, and Dadu city. So 3 tehsils are underwater. Johi, that has a population of 50,000 people. Kensha, 150,000 people. Meher, around 200,000 people. So they are in underwater. What is the humanitarian cost of these floods in this area, especially in Dadu? So most affected people are women and children. There is a food crisis. Uh, and casualty rate, unfortunately, is higher in Sindh when we draw comparison between the other provinces of Pakistan because of substandard healthcare system. Um, the the situation is worsening with the passage of time, and now we are facing food insecurity, disease, and on the regular basis, the casualty rate is a mounting casualty rate. So today's numbers are 12. Deaths are reported in Sindh, especially in Dadu and Larkana region, and there is an average 12 to 15 deaths in Dadu and Larkana region. So now I would like to discuss some underlying causes of flooding in Sindh, especially in this region, Upper Sindh, Dadu and Larkana. Besides climate change and environmental impacts, so it is a fact that we are facing environmental changes and climate change and environmental impacts. But the reasons of flooding in Upper Sindh, especially in Dadu, Larkana, and Shikarpur districts, that is because of mismanagement. One thing that is obvious is mismanagement. And why did it happen? Because of centuries-old irrigation infrastructure. Unfortunately, the irrigation budget of Sindh, that is around 18 billion rupees, and agriculture budget is around 16 billion rupees, but we have no idea what are where they are spending their budgets. There is outdated irrigation infrastructure and system. So next thing is politics behind flooding. Like every zamindar, so bade zamindar and then local have notes. There is a contention के ये बात बहुत ज़्यादा हो रही होती थी कि जो बड़े ज़मींदार and powerful political elites, they were diverting the course of water from their areas, and they were diverting to their opponents. So the major cause of this damage is politics behind the diversion of waters, and especially flood waters. Third thing is deforestation, especially and encroachment of riverine area or area of Kacha. एक बहुत 3 districts, especially Shikarpur, Larkana, and then Dadu. बहुत बड़ा एक area है, a large chunk of land that is encroached by politically influential families in these areas. And now, because of those encroachment of riverine areas, बड़े पैमाने पर उन्होंने डिफोरेस्टेशन की, जंगल काटे, और स्पेशली लास्ट जो 12 साल या 20 साल का जो अर्सा है उसमें द सेम थिंग हैपेंड. दे कट मंचर लेक, द लार्जेस्ट लेक ऑफ एशिया, और because of that cut, 7 union council of 7 Tehsil and Bhan Saidabad, they were inundated and they were underwater back in 2010, and now the history is repeating again. So floods in Dadu, Lartana, and Shikarpur region, these are not because of flooding of river Indus, but it is of mismanagement. There is a political economy of this flooding, and of course, um, politics is behind it. Again, local MPAs and MNAs, they are trying to maximize. They are trying to get maximize or gain maximize from these floodings in terms of relief efforts and rehabilitation efforts.
I'm going to ask Imtiaz to pause for a moment. Before I throw it back to Afia, I just want to welcome Michael Kugelman, who has joined us. He's the South Asia Institute Director at the Wilson Center. Welcome, Michael. Afia, I noticed that you were mid-sentence when you dropped, and then when Myra was giving her response, she raised you a number of times. I wondered if you wanted to respond to what Myra was saying, or if you could speak more directly to the dynamics that dictate how decisions are made in mitigation planning, in response, in the kinds of things. The World Bank, for example, just announced today significant support to the flood victims here in Pakistan, but has at the same time flagged that there will not be any patience for, how did she say it, zero tolerance and no nonsense policy over deductions. So what are the dynamics here that dictate how these donations are spent, how mitigation planning is done, how decisions are made about who to support and to what extent?
Thank you, Aaron. Actually, right now I don't recall what sentence I was trying to complete when I dropped out, and good to see Michael here. I would like to actually also dwell upon what Myra pointed out to two things especially. It is a case of climate justice, broader global level, and the other is the case of the class injustices that are inherent in our system, in our social system, where the haves are living in better developed areas and the have-nots have really not gotten any benefit. And you can say today in another similar dialogue, Afia Salam had showed a map of the the best developed districts, if you want to call them. And also side by side, he displayed the map of the areas which were hit by the floods. And you can see the very stark differences, So that is one thing. Obviously, we have to focus on those inequalities as well, because that's a justice issue. The other thing is, there's a lot of focus on infrastructure. And that's when you talk infrastructure and you're talking to the tune of billions of dollars. But there are so many things, like very rightly Myra said, that don't need all of that. And there are things that need to be just fixed. Now, I don't think that there needed to be an investment of billions of dollars into Sawat, where after the 2010 floods, the river zoning was made that beyond this patch, there's going to be no construction. And we saw, the hotels collapsing like straw this year in 2022. So that is something that the laws are there, the regulations are there. All they need to be done is to be implemented. Similarly, as Imtiaz mentioned about the Kacha area, about the riverine areas, the riverine areas are called that because they are riverine areas, and it's in the full flow, that's where the river extends. And if there are people living there, not just taking benefit from the fertility of the land, which is with the silt has, then they are unfortunately in harm's way. So who is allowing them to be there? Who is allowing them to, put up obstructions over there, which ultimately lead to more damage than any kind of benefit that they derive from these areas? So these are governance issues. Then she mentioned DDMAs. There is no DDMA. There is no local government and there is no DDMA. So we have an NDMA at the federal level. We do have the PDMAs where they, give down the resources. But those resources are supposed to be distributed by the DDMAs. And we do not have a local government or DDMA. So this is where that huge gap has occurred because the PDMA at a provincial level cannot micromanage. And that is when those questions go unanswered, that okay, is the aid that is being dispersed, is it going to the deserving or others are taking it? All those questions arise, and those could very well be addressed at the micro level of the local government. So that's one huge gap. And as far as the resources not having been given, I worked in the 2010 floods, and at that time I also used to go through many documents, and in those documents I saw actual allocation of even dewatering pumps to the DDMAs. So those were allocated way back in 2010, and nothing has happened. Now, since 2010, we had one cloudburst in Badin in 2011. We had a couple of other climate-related events. We had the heat wave in Karachi in 2015. So I don't know why it's only at times of flood that we are thinking of NDMA, PDMA, and DDMA. They are supposed to have been there for all those times. So they're not. Their presence is not there. Then there was the other mechanism of the government imposing very, very stringent regulations, and actually people have been calling in the development sector that they're not regulations, they're actually, stranglehold, which threw many out of work, with those NGOs which had roots in the communities. They were not able to fulfill all those difficult conditions, and that created a break with the other international organizations who were their partners, who were their donors. This is why also you have seen this slow response. Although the civil society of Pakistan has been the first responder, and hats off to them the way they have responded. But time is for each and every sector to, put in their efforts, because I know that this word has been used and overused and maybe abused. This unprecedented. It is unprecedented. There is absolutely no comparison to the scale of what happened in 2010. And another thing, when we're talking, she mentioned Tonsa and strengthening of Tonsa, we were thinking of the river floods, and all the actions were focused on managing the floods of Indus River and its tributaries. Nobody had actually taken into account that these hill torrents would be so damaging. This time, Indus hasn't flooded at all. The Mangla Dam still is not full. The Arbena spillway was opened just about a week and a half ago. So the Indus River didn't burst its bank. The cuts in Manchar, as Imtiaz mentioned, was due to the lack of proper drainage. Now that is where, yes, you do need need to put the money, and the money, of course, should not just be thrown away. Enough material now exists on the weaknesses of our drainage system, and that needs to be fixed. And it is lack of that drainage that the hill torrents coming from the Kohe Suleiman, which were in a completely different direction from where earlier floods and rains used to impact our country, have come, and we just could not manage them. So that water that came down from there is just staying in Sindh, because Sindh has a very low gradient, and there, like I said, the infrastructure has been made in a way that the drainage possibilities are not there. And this is why I don't see the next crop happening. I see these rolling disasters of disease as well as food insecurity and social upheaval. So maybe I'm being an alarmist, but I've been up and down. Even today, I've come back just a couple of hours ago from the field, and things are not good. Things are not good because the earlier response wasn't immediate.
Thank you, Afia. We are going to open up the floor for questions from the audience in just a moment. But first, I would like to welcome Lindsay Billing, a journalist and photographer. I'd also like to welcome award-winning multimedia journalist Elizabeth Angira. Also, Eric Shazar, who's an environmentalist who teaching global politics at Oxford, has joined us as well. So welcome to all three of you, along with our others. If you have any questions that you would like to ask our panelists, we will be taking those now. We just have to coordinate a bit on our side to figure out who's going to be asking the first question.
So I just quickly want to add, I don't know
Please,
if you
Maira.
read in the chat, there are people who want to share from Bahrain, Swat, and also Ghotki. And I think it would be, just so you know that there are already questions in the chat.
Thank you, Maira. I'm trying to pull up the chat. Oh, in the meantime, I would like to welcome also Hassan Balalzadi, who's joining us from Dawn. So welcome, Hassan. Hania, I had a question for you. in regards, we've been talking a lot about the flooding, but climate change is more than flooding, and the way that it needs to be addressed by governments, by nation states, and by individuals differs from location to location. With your particular work, upcycling textile waste, which is a huge pollutant, could you share some details on what you believe is what should governments be doing, particularly to deal with climate change over and above uh, incidents of flooding or incidents of natural disaster? What can they be doing to interface with industries, for example, that will have larger effects as we try to address the effects of climate change?
Thanks, Aaron. I think it's really important to understand the importance of the textile industry in Pakistan. I'm sure कि ज़्यादातर लोगों को पता होगा और सबको ही पता होगा कि हमारी textile industry contributes a huge amount to our exports. I think it's about 60% of our exports are textile. About 40 to 45% of our labor force is employed by the textile industry, and so Pakistan, the government, they vested in ensuring that nothing happens to the textile industry, which unfortunately a lot of time means कि जो status quo है वो continue हो रहा है. अगर exploitation हो रही है तो वो continue हो रही है. अगर environment की exploitation, labor की exploitation, because they don't want to rock the boat, right? And I think that's the unfortunate part, where we have to bring people on board. There has to be discussions and conversations to show that there is a sustainable way forward, where we're not losing out on economic growth as such, but also not in the meantime, wreaking havoc with our environment in Pakistan, and continuing to exploit. This is definitely a social justice issue, as Afia ji said, and it's a labor issue as well. I think what's really important is not just for Pakistan, but I think for the global South, whether it's Bangladesh or any other country that has a huge garment sector, dependence on the garment sector. I talked about the accord earlier, and if we collectively have legislation in place, our governments have legislations in place, I think it's going to force the fashion industry from the global north to not be able to negotiate, right? फिर वो कहाँ जाएंगे? अगर सबके पास accord है, सबके पास legislation है that is so strong कि you can't mess around with, because अभी ये होता है कि अगर आप एक country के अंदर legislation लेकर आ रहे हैं तो कहते हैं अच्छा जी goodbye, हम कहीं और लेके जा रहे हैं जहाँ पे हमें ये सब, there's not going to be, we don't have to, work towards supply chains that are transparent. We don't have to have like manufacturing that is not contributing, dyes that are not polluting. So I think that's really important in terms of sort of force multiplication for countries in the global south, right? So we're strong together. And I think in terms of Pakistan, definitely government को ये realize करना पड़ेगा, because climate crisis एक कोई future की बात नहीं है. Because जब I remember, I think I was about 12 years old when I first heard about climate. Not climate change, it was global warming, right? And it was such a thing of the future. And now it's not a thing of the future. We're all experiencing it at the moment. So our governments need to understand, our government needs to understand that we have to do this now. There has to be pressure. There has to be a concerted effort collectively, policymakers, and working with our states, our textile states. देखें, ये सब लोगों को common knowledge है कि अगर आप कभी अगर आपने यह पढ़ा भी होगा garment workers के बारे में कि अगर वो कभी protest करते हैं ना तो वो उनको कह दिया जाता है anti-state. This is not fair, right? Like this is they need to understand that the people of this country are the only way that you can actually bring about change. And I'm not just saying कि labor के ऊपर earlier we discussed this too. They're interconnected. Both of these things are interconnected. So the government needs to understand, you cannot, if there's protests happening, you need to hear why they're happening. If there's labor exploitation happening, you need to understand why it's happening and listen to the workers and hold these large businesses accountable. आप एक फैक्ट्री लगा के जिसको आप दिखा रहे हैं कि जी ये बहुत हम बहुत इसको environmentally sustainable बना रहे हैं और बाकी जो आपकी 50 यूनिट्स हैं वो दबा के pollute कर रही हैं, तो that's also, I think that's a facade that also needs to be looked into, and definitely not holding anyone that speaks up against textile industries and textile, I guess, states in this country, and jailing them or trying to shut them down. I think that's really important. And that conversation needs to happen everywhere, in schools, in universities. Because being apathetic, देखिए हम apathy कहते हैं global north की है, हमारी अपनी भी apathy है, right? And I think as Afia ji earlier said कि जो लोग well to do हैं, the haves and the have nots के अंदर, वो तो अपनी ज़िंदगी गुजार लेंगे, उन्होंने अपनी vacations पे भी चले जाना है, Maldives, and the end कौन लोग suffer कर रहे हैं? वही जो बेचारे government workers हैं, वो suffer कर रहे हैं पहले exploitation के through, and then they're suffering because their houses are being swept away. So I think it's really important, important for public pressure. There needs to be awareness, there needs to be pressure, there needs to be a lot of conversation so that we can bring about policy changes.
So Maira, if you could talk briefly about accountability, and for all of the panelists, what is the role of accountability from the individual level or the industrial level or the level of the nation state, either in the global south or the global north?
Sure, I'd be happy to share some thoughts that I have, and also to, this has to be a collective question and a collective address, right? What do we want accountability to look like in the country? And to give another example of जो अभी इम्तियाज साहब बोल रहे थे, and also Haniya, when you were talking about textiles में concentrated power, मतलब मेरा अपना छोटा सा example, and I think like these examples for me at least are very important because they offer such a powerful and clear diagnostic of how power operates in the country, of how political economy manifests in very, very local and ways. कि मैं जब इरिगेशन डिपार्टमेंट के साथ, पंजाब इरिगेशन डिपार्टमेंट के साथ काम करी थी, तो एक दफ़ा बीच में एक ड्रेन्स का सर्वे कराया गया, जिसका बड़ा सिंपल सा मकसद था कि आप देखें कौन सी फैक्ट्रियाँ हरियाणा ड्रेन में, उसके कुछ जो हिस्से थे अराउंड लाहौर एंड शेखुपुरा, कौन सी फैक्ट्रीज कितना गंद डाल रही हैं, उसको मेजर करें, एफ्लुएंट डिस्चार्ज, और उस बेसिस पे जो डिपार्टमेंट चार्ज करती है वो उनको चार्ज लगाया जाए, राइट? सिंपल, नॉट इवन कि हम ट्रीटमेंट इम्पोज कर रहे हैं या हम साफ कर देंगे, वो तो दूर की बात, दिस इज जस्ट कि चार्जेस क्या हैं. And so as part of the survey, even just getting access, even getting permission to enter factory premises to do our calculations, it was such a struggle. Government team होती थी और उसमें across several levels irrigation के होते थे, revenue staff होता, irrigation staff होता था, उन लोगों के पास अपने government IDs होते थे, but factories के जो gates होते थे, it was basically like trying to enter a fortress, and it was such a struggle gaining access. But again, and then I've like discussed this so many times with people in just the irrigation department. So ये survey किया गया, इससे 2-3 दिन इतना time लगाया गया, मैं वापस चली गई, मैं पढ़ाने लग गई, I came back several times, and I would keep asking, अच्छा फिर क्या हुआ जो आपने रिपोर्ट बनाई थी, उसका क्या हुआ, एक्शन लिया गया or not? And what people said, what officials said was, हाँ, इस तरह होता रहता है, ये पहली स्टडी नहीं हुई थी, ऐसे तो पहले भी हुआ है, हम कर देते हैं, देखिए हमने इतना काम दिया, हमने बताया है कि शायद 500% से, I forget the exact number now, कि कितना ज्यादा recovery होनी चाहिए from these big businesses. So there were paper factories, bleaching, cement, textile, पूरी वैरायटी थी, एंड वो कुछ नहीं हुआ, सेक्रेटरी की ट्रांसफर हो गई, रिपोर्ट कहीं अलमारी में रख दी गई, एंड like nothing, it wasn't acted upon. And of course part of what's going on here is जो repercussions होती हैं for officials who then try to pursue some of these things, right? So बीच में again when I was doing my work, I remember एक ऐसा केस हुआ था about payment delays की कोई बात हो रही थी. अब आप देखें एक कंपनी निशात लिनन जैसी, they have the country's top legal counsel on their payroll. तो वो तो बहुत जल्दी like 1-2 hearings में अगर डिपार्टमेंट भेजती भी है उनको चिट्ठी कि आपने ये पे करना है या इतना करना है या इतना डिफॉल्ट है आपका, वो स्टे ऑर्डर ले लेंगे, वो लिटिगेशन लंबी शुरू हो जाएगी. So ये these are again to kind of remind us and कि लोकल लेवल पे इतने ये पेचीदा, कॉम्प्लेक्स और इस तरह अकाउंटेबिलिटी मैनिफेस्ट हो रही है. एंड देन ऑफ कोर्स जो पहले आप जो हमें डिस्क्राइब कर रहे थे इम्तियाज, जो कि 2010 के बाद भी ये सवाल उठे थे, राइट, कहाँ पे कट लगाया गया, क्या जगह नीचे आई, अगेन ये और फिर रिस्पॉन्स इज यूजुअली कि नहीं ऐसा नहीं हुआ और ये तो जरूरत थी, दिस वाज अ टेक्निकल नीड, राइट, like but just the fact that there is so much distrust I think that in itself is that's all that matters. Actually, that's all that should matter. कि आप उसकी जो भी अपनी quote unquote scientific explanation, technical explanation. So these are again to kind of remind us and कि local level पे इतने ये पेचीदा complex और इस तरह accountability manifest हो रही है. And then of course जो पहले आप जो हमें describe कर रहे थे इम्तियाज जो कि 2010 के बाद भी ये सवाल उठे थे राइट कहाँ पे कट लगाया गया क्या जगह नीचे आई अगेन ये और फिर आपस फिर रिस्पॉन्स इज यूजुअली कि नहीं ऐसा नहीं हुआ और ये तो जरूरत थी दिस वाज अ टेक्निकल नीड राइट लाइक but just the fact that there is so much distrust I think that in itself is that's all that matters actually that's all that should matter कि आप उसकी जो भी अपनी कोट एंड कोट साइंटिफिक एक्सप्लेनेशन टेक्निकल एक्सप्लेनेशन दे रहे हैं कि हाँ क्यों फ्लड करना है कि ग्रेविटी ऐसी है लैंड का स्लोप ऐसा है ड्रेनेज की डायरेक्शन ऐसी है कि कोई ट्रस्ट ही नहीं कर रहा अगर लोग पहले से कन्विंस्ड हैं कि पानी वहां जहाँ पावरफुल लोग कह रहे हैं जाएगा और ये सबको पता है अखबारों में आ रहा है 2010 के बाद ये बात हुई तो वही ये सोचने की बात है कि ऐसी जब आपकी अथॉरिटीज हैं तो गोइंग फॉरवर्ड what can they be entrusted with and what are ways in which the public like people like us can become more involved so that we are more educated not that we're not currently educated but that we're more educated so that we can ask more specific and targeted questions अब जिस तरह ये जो आप बात कर रहे हैं ब्रीच नाली वगैरह इसका आप सिर्फ एक डॉक्यूमेंट अगर देखें 2010 के बाद जो लाहौर हाईकोर्ट की इंक्वायरी हुई थी उसमें कितने मीडिया शोज किए गए उसमें कितना अखबारात में लिखा गया क्या उसकी फाइंडिंग्स थी उसमें भी बाकायदा लिखा हुआ है वो कहते हैं कि साउथ पंजाब की वो बात करें दिस इज अनदर आई थिंक लाइक रेड फ्लैग राइट why was this done only for one province what about like other places or agar again I think I have in mind some studies I'll be very happy to share them but if other people know about other official bodies that looked into these sorts of questions and what their findings were what their assessments were and solutions were we should know this better but वो जो रिपोर्ट है 2010 वाली जो आप ये लोकल लेवल की भी बात करी थी आपके उन्होंने भी रिकमेंडेशन दिया राइट लाइक दे से कि आप बंद कमेटियां बना दें that is just one thing that can be done कि आप लोगों को ज्यादा अथॉरिटी दें not just because they live in closer proximity to these structures and they understand like पानी का बहाव बढ़ रहा है नीचे जा रहा है क्या trends हैं right like these are people who are working with the land and the water so of course they understand all this really well so but वो होता नहीं right because the culture or the history or the habit of governing has been so top down that nothing like that to my knowledge nothing like that happened and then on the and then हाँ अच्छा एक और and I think this links the international accountability and internal accountability वाला question कि और क्योंकि ये यूनिवर्सिटी इवेंट है I'm guessing यहाँ पे बहुत यूनिवर्सिटी स्टूडेंट्स होंगे तो मेरे ख्याल में ये एक इम्पोर्टेंट शुरू का प्रोजेक्ट बन सकता है रिसर्च प्रोजेक्ट आप लोग करें कि इतने सालों से कॉप कॉन्फ्रेंसेस हो रही हैं और हमारी गवर्नमेंट टीम्स जाती हैं तो उनमें कौन जाता है उनको किस बेसिस पे लेकर भेजा जाता है और बिकॉज वो सब लाइक ये सब टैक्स पेयर मनी पे जा रहे हैं ना और फिर कि वो वहाँ पे क्या अचीव करते हैं वो क्या कॉन्वर्सेशंस करते हैं मैं बहुत थोड़ी इस तरह की इंटरनेशनल वाटर इवेंट्स पे गई हूँ लाइक आई से barely 2 or 3 and at most of them I would say that I have been very disappointed by doing a comparison कि मैंने ऐसी टीम्स देखी हैं इवेंट्स पे जो बहुत अपना तैयारी करके आते हैं उनको पता होता है क्या बात करनी है they have an agenda और हमारी unfortunately representation it has been completely utterly I think lacking and again I think Afia you're probably a much better person to speak to these things but I've been having conversations with 2 or 3 people who have been going to the COP specifically and I don't want to take names here because I think these are stories that they should tell and they haven't been going as part of the official teams and they don't have anything encouraging or reassuring to tell us right so these are again questions for us to ask our authorities and demand some sort of response.
Thank you, Maira. I would like to quickly welcome Zahid Hussain as well as Sharmil Faruqi, and we've also been joined by Maria Nera, the WHO Director of Public Health, Environmental and Social Determinants of Health. Welcome to you all. I'm glad you could join us. Imtiaz, I would love to get your response to this question about accountability. I've noticed there was a comment in the chat that the government isn't to blame, that the amount of rain in the last month has been so unprecedented that that nobody could have possibly have planned for this, and so the government should perhaps be given some slack. But how do you respond to this question of responsibility on the ground level?
I think grass root level से लेकर स्टेट लेवल तक अकाउंटेबिलिटी सबको पता है कि नहीं होनी, जिसकी वजह से हम ये फ्लडिंग देखते हैं। स्पेशली मैं बात करूँगा यहाँ दादू डिस्ट्रिक्ट की और लाड़काना। अब ये होता कैसे है? सबसे पहले बात ये हुई सिंध में कि कंबर
We seem to be having a bunch of technical issues over here with the internet. I think everybody's being affected. So I'm going to read two tweets that have just come across. Samana Wahid has written, in response to what Afia said, things are indeed bad. I got back from Badin on Friday and the scale of devastation is apocalyptic. We've been working on ground in Sindh since August, and I can honestly say that I've never seen so much collective misery in my life. At about the same time, Malik Abrar Ahmad Khan wrote, I'm from Bahrain Swat. My entire hometown is underwater. We've started a campaign against climate change here in Bahrain Swat, and the government is working on temporary relief, but we have to work on proper rehabilitation. Unfortunately, with the technical issues that we're having, we are not able to have Malik provide his own accounting. But I think it goes without saying that the situation on the ground in Sindh in Pakistan and in other parts of Pakistan, in Sindh and Balochistan and other parts of Pakistan is in fact apocalyptic. And for those of you who've been following the media on this, which I believe is probably most of us, the word doomsday keeps showing up, which I think is where a lot of us feel climate change is likely to take us sooner rather than later. Given the technical difficulties we're having with connectivity, with people dropping in and dropping out, I think having spent nearly 90 minutes, this may be an unfortunate time to call this evening over. It's been a pleasure to have all of my panelists here. I would like to thank Afia Salam, Maira Hayat Haniya Mansoor, Imtiaz Ali, for joining us here. I would like to thank all of our guests for tuning in and listening to our chat about climate change. And in the coming weeks, we will have more spaces. We will have more panels covering issues broadly from migration and economic impacts to gender inequities and climate justice. And we hope that as those panels are scheduled and announced, that you will join us for those as well. Our other faculty members from Social Development and Policy will be joining us for those panels. We will have panels moderated by Akdas Afzal and Tadreen Midhat, and we look forward to having all of you join us for those. So thank you for joining us this evening, and I wish you a good evening, and I hope to see you at the next event. Thank you very much.